for joining us for the Sunday, January 7th, 2023 reading of the Boulder Daily Camera and Longmont Times Call. My name is Malachi King. Today we will be reading the following main articles. UCCS process raises CU Boulder concerns by Olivia Doak. More than 150 jetliners grounded by Andrew McAvoy and David Koenig. And You Just Can't Seem to Die by Corbett Stevenson, and following up with miscellaneous articles. First on the list is UCCS process raises CU Boulder concerns by Olivia Doak. An unexpected chancellor hire at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs is raising concerns about the ongoing search for a new chancellor at the Boulder campus. At UCCS, the search committee presented CU System President Todd Salomon with 5 finalists for chancellor. Salomon selected 2 finalists to visit campus and complete interviews, but instead selected Jennifer Sobanet, who did not make the list as a finalist. This is very concerning because the committee did not find Jennifer Sobanet to be one of the top candidates, said Jeffrey Montes de Oca, sociology professor and UCCS search committee member. The committee determined that she was not as qualified as the other candidates. Sobanet was named as interim UCCS chancellor after Venkat Reddy stepped down to return to the UCCS facility in July. Salomon said he chose Sobanet to be the permanent chancellor because he feels that she's the right person at this point in time for UCCS. I think she's going to be an outstanding chancellor, Salomon said. She's done a really good job over the last 6 months as interim. She's made meaningful progress on the things I've asked her to work on, and I think she's proven she can do the job well. Because she wasn't selected as a finalist, Sobanet was planning to leave in March and had accepted another job offer just hours before Salomon offered her the position on December 8th. The call that I received from President Salomon offering me the permanent position as chancellor was unexpected, to say the least, Sobanet said. That said, I am thrilled to continue to grow the momentum we have built over the past 6 months. University of Colorado Board of Regents Policy 3 allows the system president to make the final decision on a new chancellor. CU Boulder is in the midst of its own search for a new chancellor after Phil DeStefano announced in September that he's stepping down to return to the School of Education. It will be the first time since 2009 since CU Boulder has had new leadership. If I was a faculty member at Boulder, I would be very, very concerned right now, Montes de Oca said. Something similar happened down at CSU Pueblo. Something similar happened at CSU Fort Collins, from what I understand. I think that UCCS marks a pattern, and that should be concerning to people. Understanding the decision. The hunt for a UCCS chancellor began in September. Montes de Oca said the search committee followed a code of ethics, completed bias training, went through all 93 candidates individually, ranked them through an online polling system, and spent multiple days interviewing candidates to narrow the list down to 5 finalists. It was a lot of time, effort, and money, collectively, and so it was extremely frustrating that a person who was not on the list of recommended finalists, who never came to campus for interviews, and who was never fully vetted, was suddenly named chancellor, Montes de Oca said. At UCCS, officials hired Greenwood Asher and Associates to conduct the chancellor search. The search firm received $145,433 for its work, which included both the executive search fee and direct expenses, according to a public records request. The 2 finalists who visited the Colorado Springs campus met with community members, Salomon said. The 2 finalists are outstanding, accomplished people, and I'm incredibly grateful they applied and wish them nothing but the best, Salomon said. It just became clear as we went through the process, they weren't the right choice for UCCS. UCCS faces significant enrollment, budget, and morale problems, Salomon said, adding that he chose Sobanet because she is highly skilled in those areas. Given the challenges the campuses face, he said felt like he needed to make a good decision quickly to ensure the campus wasn't in limbo for another 2 years, which would have been the result of an extended search. Salomon said, Sobonette has also developed impressively deep relationships between community and the campus, and several leaders in Colorado Springs support her, including Jana Reeder Kleinmeyer, President and CEO of the Colorado Springs Chamber and Economic Development Corporation, Yemi Mobilade, Mayor, and several CU regents voiced their support for Sobonette's hiring. However, Montes de Oca said he and others on campus were angry that there wasn't the kind of shared governance to choose a chancellor that they would expect. In higher education, shared governance is a shared decision-making process across all ranks that's rooted in partnership, equity, accountability, and ownership. Knowing that President Salomon has had a close personal relationship with Jennifer Sobonette, it was very disappointing to see that he did not give the campus a chance to actually vet her as a candidate to be our permanent chancellor, Montes de Oca said, adding, There is a potential conflict of interest at work here, and I think there are fair questions on whether Jennifer Sobonette really is the best candidate. Minette Church, a UCCS anthropology professor and search committee member for the previous UCCS chancellor, said there's a larger national context that goes beyond Salomon and Sobonette. She said there's a growing conflict of cultures at United States universities between academia's shared governance and people with business backgrounds that are increasingly getting hired for university leadership positions. Church said this conflict and disintegration of shared governance is creating feelings of existential fear and angst in faculty. Untransparent or closed hires are definitely a part of the business world, Church said. Staff or faculty who have a business background, who have worked in large corporations, probably don't see what the fuss is all about. Morale is low, she said, and faculty have different levels of trust in campus systems due to feeling devalued. The academy is not a corporation, Church said. CU Boulder search. Montes de Oca said many people are confused, upset, and cynical about the process and administration. He said people asked him if the decision to hire Sobonette was already predetermined, and he had to assure them the committee was going through the entire process. The problem is not the process, per se. It's the policies that allow the president of the system to essentially ignore the process and make his own choice, Montes de Oca said. It's pretty clear that what he did is well within his rights, and that's a problem. It's a problem when our highest leaders can't be held accountable for their actions. Church said she wishes there had been more dialogue with the search committee before the decision was made. I think Salomon is arguing that this was an exceptional circumstance and that he needed to use this policy to the letter of the law, Church said. I don't think that I really like the idea that the policy, as written, allows everybody to be blindsided in this way. Church attended a virtual open forum on December 12th between Salomon and the UCCS community to hear the dialogue surrounding the decision. More than 200 people joined the meeting to understand more about what happened, including many from CU Boulder, Church said. They, CU Boulder faculty, are very aware of what happened, and I think anything that has the appearance of a black box or closed search decision, while that happens all the time in the corporate world and is maybe appropriate there, that's not what faculty and staff governance has always been about, Church said. CU Boulder Professor Shelley Miller, a member of the Chancellor Search Committee, said she was initially very concerned about what happened at UCCS, but understood how difficult the decision was for Salomon after attending the meeting. This kind of unprecedented decision indeed could have consequences for the CU Boulder Chancellor search, so I wanted to make sure I understood the best I could what happened, and how we might, in our search, ensure confidence in our processes, Miller said. AGB Search is the firm hired by the University of Colorado to conduct the national search for the CU Boulder Chancellor. AGB is set to receive 3 payments throughout the search process, according to the firm's contract with the university. The final cost of the search won't be finalized until a candidate accepts the job, according to information found in a public records request. The first payment is for a base search fee, which is calculated to be 1/3 of the first-year salary of the person who accepts the job, according to the contract. The listed salary range for the new CU Boulder Chancellor is $627,800 to $829,800, according to the job posting on AGB Search's website. Based on the salary range, the cost of the base search fee could range from $209,266 to $276,600. University officials also are set to reimburse AGB for expenses such as candidate travel, consultant travel, advertising, and background checks, according to the contract. Finally, the university is expected to pay an additional $5,000 for indirect, unspecified expenses. The University of Colorado consists of 4 campuses, including the Colorado Springs campus, the Boulder campus, the Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora, and the University of Colorado Denver campus. I'm highly confident that the CU Boulder search is going to move forward well and produce an outstanding pool of candidates that will produce our next chancellor, Salomon said. Salomon said DeStefano stepped down at a good time to find a new chancellor. The campus's national reputation in academics, research, and athletics will help draw outstanding candidates to the job, he said. And the next article is titled, More Than 150 Jetliners Grounded, by Audrey McAvoy and David Koenig. Federal officials on Saturday ordered the immediate grounding of some Boeing 737 MAX 9 jetliners until they are inspected after an Alaska Airlines plane suffered a blowout that left a gaping hole in the side of the fuselage. The required inspections take around 4 to 8 hours per aircraft and affect about 171 airplanes worldwide. Alaska Airlines said in a statement that of the 65 737 MAX 9 aircraft in its fleet, crews had inspected the paneled-over exits as part of a recent maintenance work on 18 planes, and those were cleared to return to service Saturday. Inspections for the remaining aircraft were expected to be completed in the coming days, the company said. An Alaska Airlines jetliner blew out a portion of its fuselage shortly after takeoff 3 miles above Oregon late Friday, forcing the pilots to make an emergency landing as its 171 passengers and 6 crew members donned oxygen masks. No one was seriously hurt as the depressurized plane returned safely to Portland International Airport about 20 minutes after departure. Passenger Evan Smith said a boy and his mother were sitting in the row where the panel blew out, and the child's shirt was sucked off him and out of the plane. You heard a big loud bang to the left rear, a whooshing sound, and all the oxygen masks deployed instantly, and everyone got those on, Smith told KATU-TV. The National Transportation Safety Board said Saturday it will investigate. Alaska Airlines CEO Ben Minicucci said the inspection of the company's 737-9 aircraft could take days to complete. They made up a fifth of the company's 314 planes. We are working with Boeing and regulators to understand what occurred, and will share updates as more information is available, Minicucci said. My heart goes out to those who are on this flight. I am so sorry for what you experienced. Alaska canceled more than 100 flights, or 15% of its Saturday schedule by midday, according to FlightAware. United said the plane inspections would result in about 60 cancellations. The Port of Portland, which operates the airport, told KPTV that the fire department treated minor injuries at the scene. One person was taken for more treatment, but wasn't seriously hurt. Flight 1282 took off from Portland at 5:07 p.m. Friday for a 2-hour flight to Ontario, California. About 6 minutes later, the chunk of the fuselage blew out as the plane was at about 16,000 feet. One of the pilots declared an emergency and asked for clearance to descend to 10,000 feet, the altitude where the air would have had enough oxygen to breathe safely. We need to turn back to Portland, the pilot told controllers in a calm voice that she maintained throughout the landing. Videos posted by passengers online showed a gaping hole where the paneled-over exit had been and passengers wearing masks. They applauded when the plane landed safely about 13 minutes after the blowout. Firefighters then came down the aisle, asking passengers to remain in their seats as they treated the injured. The aircraft involved rolled off the assembly line and received its certification 2 months ago, according to online FAA records. It has been on 145 flights since entering commercial service November 11th, said Flight Radar 24, another tracking service. The flight from Portland was the aircraft's third of the day. And the next article is titled, "You Just Can't Seem to Die," by Corbett Stevenson. With 2 near-death experiences already under his belt, a 62-year-old Broomfield resident was recently given his 3rd new lease on life with the help of first responders. "I should basically be dead 3 or 4 times, to the point where my cat looks at me like, 'I think you're catching up to me,'" Cletus Liechty said. Liechty is a former Marine whose good fortune in surviving grim situations came to light recently when a number of first responders were honored at an awards ceremony in Broomfield for their role in saving his life after a severe heart attack in September that nearly ended his lucky streak. "I've been through quite a bit. I've been blown out of a building, had concrete laying on me, and I've picked up body parts of my fellow Marines," Liechty said. "And then I've also spent time personally with former President Ronald Reagan, where he called me by my first name quite often. So I've had the best and the worst of everything. But that particular day, it looked very grim." Liechty has been familiar with grim situations since early in his life, including his survival of the 1983 Beirut barracks bombings. On October 23rd that year, 2 truck bombs struck buildings in the city, including a building where Liechty and his fellow Marines were stationed as part of a military peacekeeping operation during the Lebanese Civil War. The attacks killed more than 300 people, including 220 Marines. Liechty was among the 128 Americans injured in the blast, which was caused by the equivalent of 12,000 pounds of TNT. "I was blown out of a 4-story building. I shattered both of my hips and had to have those replaced," Liechty said of the attack. "I had a cement chunk sitting on top of me, waiting for it to fall on me and kill me." When he was finally pulled from the rubble, rescuers told Liechty he had been trapped for about 7 hours. He was then transferred to the USS Guam until he was taken back to the United States. The bombings came only a few years into his military service, where he had been previously served as a member of former President Ronald Reagan's personal guard. Years passed before Liechty's next close call, when in June of this year, his tractor trailer flipped off of an overpass and onto a street below in Park Avenue near Interstate 25. "The trailer landed on its side, and I smacked my head on the pavement, and they had to cut me out of it with those jaws of life," Liechty said. "I should have been squeezed in there and crushed, but I was twisted up inside of there somehow, and they cut me out of it, and I stood up and walked away." Liechty said he remembers a woman who witnessed the crash following him for a time after he escaped the truck, keeping a hand on his shoulder. Her husband explained that she believed Liechty was blessed and wanted to touch him. "My daughter calls me Rasputin. She's like, 'You just can't kill your old Marine ass. You just can't seem to die,' he said, referring to the Russian mystic who was said to have survived eating and drinking a meal laced with cyanide. Liechty's next close call happened in September when his heart stopped while visiting his friend Courtney Brooks. "I remember saying to her, 'You know, I'm not ill, I don't feel wrong, but something feels really funny, and I don't know what it is,' he said. From her explanation, the next thing she knows, I slowly fell over on the couch." Later, Liechty would learn that one of his arteries was 100% blocked, causing a severe heart attack. Brooks provided CPR until Broomfield police arrived on the scene, and officers Michelle St. John and Jennifer Rank took over. Although the CPR kept Liechty alive long enough for medical staff to get his heart beating on its own, his brain remained inactive. "I was brain dead for 41 minutes, completely brain dead. which is astronomically unheard of from what I've been told, Liechty said. The doctors actually came into my room after a period of time and said, "He's never going to recover. He's never going to come through." Expecting Liechty to, at best, live out his last years in a vegetative state, his daughter, Sierra Liechty, and his doctors called his pastor to administer his last rites. "They were getting ready to pull everything when my best friend walked in," Liechty said, referring to his friend Mike Henry. Henry basically said, "No one is pulling anything. This guy guarded the President of the United States. You're going to give him more time." Henry instructed the doctors to give Liechty 10 more minutes, after which, if his brain activity didn't return, they could continue with his last rites and unplug the machines, keeping him alive. "My brain waves started going again within 10 minutes, so I guess I owe my life to Henry," Liechty said. Despite the odds, those 10 minutes saved Liechty's life, and even though his doctors expected him to have a multitude of long-term effects from the incident, he continued to defy expectations. "I haven't had not one aneurysm, not one blood clot, not one thing happened. To not really have anything wrong with me, they said it's something like 1/1,000,000th of a chance," he said. Other than the slow healing process from his sternum being broken in an effort to start his heart, Liechty hasn't had any negative effects from the incident and has been doing well since. He's returned to his active lifestyle and healthy diet, which Liechty's doctors believe played a role in his survival. Liechty and his loved ones celebrated his story, happy for him to have continued his death-defying antics. But news of his survival didn't reach the police officers who helped save him for over a month. "You're never really told what happens to the patient. They go to the hospital and then that's it," Rank said. She and St. John both learned of Liechty's miraculous survival when they were informed that they and other team members would be honored for their work at an awards ceremony. In November, the North Metro Fire Rescue District presented certificates to Rank and St. John, dispatchers Taylor Garthwaite and Charles Ector, Westminster firefighters Aaron Wibble, Tim Fletcher, and Scott Roloff, and North Metro firefighters Anthony Villegas and Jacob Gilbert, in celebration of their role in saving Liechty's life. We get a lot of those calls. It's not rare, but it is honestly very rare that people survive, and that's why it was just really incredible that he did, St. John said. "It was pretty incredible to meet him. You put in so many hours of training, and it's really nice to have all that come together for that moment. It's just like, wow, you do make a difference, at least in his world." Liechty attributes his survival to his faith and believes God has kept him on this side of the grass to help others. "I believe that if a person in their heart believes strongly in something, and what they believe in is not about themselves, and if you stay focused on other people more than yourself, you'll have a good life," he said. "I'm very outgoing. I love to dance. I love to sing. Even though I'm an older man now, I just don't give up on it, and I can attribute it all to my faith." Liechty was introduced to his faith by his grandmother. He met her for the first time while struggling to decide between a wrestling scholarship and joining the Marines, and asked her advice. She explained that the Bible defines the greatest act of love as giving your life for someone else. Liechty decided at that moment to enlist. His grandmother passed away only 12 days later. "I never got a chance to speak to her again, but she was the most influential thing that ever stepped in front of me for such a short period of time," he said. "Believing in something other than yourself is a very powerful entity. When you believe only in yourself, you get disappointed quickly." Liechty's beliefs have only been strengthened by his close calls with death, and he plans to use his third new lease on life to continue helping others by participating in his church, putting on puppet shows for children every Sunday, and donating his time to nonprofits. "I wear my heart on my sleeve. I don't hide anything inside. Not after being blown out of a building, my life laid out on a street underneath cement, and being towed out of a vehicle with the jaws of life," Liechty said. "You have to do the very best that you can, and you have to give thanks for what very little that you have. That little bit of love is everything. Love is everything." The next article is titled, "To Plead or Not to Plead? That is the Question for Defendants," by by Michael Kunzelman. Hundreds of Donald Trump supporters charged with storming the U.S. Capitol have faced the same choice in the 3 years since the attack. Either admit their guilt and accept the consequences, or take their chances in a trial in hopes of securing a rare acquittal. Those who have gambled and lost on a trial have received significantly longer prison sentences than those who took responsibility for joining the January 6, 2021 attack, an Associated Press review of court records shows. The AP's analysis of Capitol riot sentencing data reinforces a firmly established tenet of the U.S. criminal justice system. Pleading guilty and cooperating with authorities carries a substantial benefit when it comes time for sentencing. On the one hand, the Constitution guarantees the accused a right to a jury trial. It's a fundamental constitutional right. But the reality is that if you exercise that right, you're likely to be punished more severely than you would have been had you pled guilty to the offense, said Jimmy Garuli, a University of Notre Dame law professor and former federal prosecutor. More than 700 defendants have pleaded guilty to federal charges related to the January 6 attack, while over 150 others have opted for a trial decided by a judge or jury in Washington, D.C. It's no surprise most cases have ended in a plea deal. Many rioters were captured on video inside the Capitol and later gloated about their actions on social media, making it difficult for their lawyers to mount much of a defense. The average prison sentence for a January 6 defendant who was convicted of a felony after a contested trial is roughly 2 years longer than those who pleaded guilty to a felony, according to the AP's review of more than 1,200 cases. The data also show that rioters who pleaded guilty to misdemeanors were far less likely to get jail time than those who contested their misdemeanor charges at a trial. Lawyers for some January 6 defendants who went to trial have complained about what has long been described as a trial tax, a longer sentence imposed on those who refuse to accept plea deals. A defense lawyer made that argument last year after a landmark trial for former leaders of the far-right Proud Boys extremist group convicted of seditious conspiracy. A judge sentenced 4 ex-Proud Boys leaders to prison terms ranging from 15 to 22 years. Prosecutors had recommended prison terms ranging from 27 to 33 years for a plot to stop the peaceful transfer of presidential power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. After the sentencings, defense attorney Norm Pattis filed plea offers that prosecutors made before the Proud Boys went to trial. Prosecutors' sentencing recommendations after the trial were 3 or 4 times higher than what they had estimated the defendants would face if they had pleaded guilty to seditious conspiracy before the trial. Prosecutors persuaded the judge to apply a terrorism enhancement that significantly increased the range of prison terms recommended under sentencing guidelines. Pattis argued that the government's recommendations amounted to a trial tax that violated the Sixth Amendment. In effect, the defendants were punished because they demanded their right to a trial, he wrote. In the federal court system overall, nearly 98% of convictions in the year that ended September 30 were the result of a guilty plea, according to data collected by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. Few criminal cases make it to a jury because defendants have a powerful incentive to plead guilty and spare the government from spending time and limited resources on a trial. But advocates for reform have long complained that plea bargaining is unfairly coercive and can even push people who are innocent to take a deal out of fear of a lengthy prison sentence if they take their chances at trial. As of January 1st, at least 157 defendants have been sentenced after pleading guilty to felony charges for serious crimes related to the Capitol attack. They received an average prison sentence of approximately 2 years and 5 months, according to the AP's data. At least 68 riot defendants have been convicted of a felony after trials with contested facts. They have been sentenced to an average of approximately 4 years and 3 months behind bars. The AP's comparison excludes 10 sentences for seditious conspiracy convictions because nobody who pleaded guilty to the same charge has been sentenced yet. The analysis also excludes convictions from over a dozen stipulated bench trials, in which the judge decided the cases based on facts that both sides agreed to before the trial started. The gap is similarly wide for a subset of felony cases in which a capital rioter was convicted of assault. The average prison sentence for 83 rioters who pleaded guilty to an assault charge was approximately 3 years and 5 months. The average prison sentence for 28 rioters convicted of an assault charge at trial was roughly 6 years and 1 month. The trend also applies to misdemeanor cases against capital rioters who didn't engage in violent or destructive behavior. Of 467 riot defendants who pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor, more than half avoided jail time. Meanwhile, judges handed down terms of imprisonment to 22 of 23 defendants who went to trial and were convicted only of misdemeanors. After the first trial for a January 6 case, U.S. District Judge Dabney Friedrich sentenced a Texas man to more than 7 years in prison after a jury convicted him of storming the Capitol with a holstered handgun, helmet, and body armor. Prosecutors had recommended a 15-year prison sentence for Guy Reffitt, but before the trial, prosecutors presented him with a possible plea deal that would have recommended less than 5 years in prison. Reffitt's attorney, F. Clinton Broden, said in a court filing that the government's 15-year recommendation makes a mockery of the criminal justice system. One of the things when we talk about our democracy and our Constitution is this idea that you have a right to go to trial. You're not sentenced to 3 times as high of a sentence if you go to trial, Broden said during the hearing, according to a transcript. Justice Department prosecutor Jeffrey Nestler told the judge that the government wasn't seeking a trial penalty in any stretch of the imagination, adding, "It's because the defendant's conduct here." The judge said Reffitt's sentencing guidelines range would have been roughly 2 years lower if he had accepted responsibility early and pleaded guilty. There's a cost for going to trial, and the guidelines make pretty clear what that cost is, Friedrich said. The risks of going to trial also are illustrated by the case against Dr. Simon Gold, a leading figure in the anti-vaccine movement. Gold entered the Capitol with John Strand, a boyfriend who worked for a group that Gold founded. Both were charged with the same crimes. Gold pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor. Strand went to trial and was convicted of 5 charges, including a felony obstruction charge. U.S. District Judge Christopher Cooper sentenced Gold to 2 months in prison and sentenced Strand to 2 years and 8 months behind bars. Prosecutors had sought a prison sentence of 6 years and 6 months in prison for Strand. Strand's lawyer, Stephen Brenwald, questioned why the government's sentencing recommendation for Strand was nearly 40 times longer than Gold's prison sentence. Strand was following Gold's lead on January 6, the attorney argued. It would stand to reason that Mr. Strand should receive a lesser sentence. After all, they both engaged in exactly the same conduct that day, though Dr. Gold was the reason that both of them went to the Capitol, Brenwald wrote in court papers. The judge told Strand that he wasn't getting a trial penalty for exercising his constitutional rights. Unlike Gold, Strand didn't get credit for accepting responsibility for his conduct on January 6. And to the contrary, you've not accepted responsibility in a pretty remarkable way. You have professed not just that the government didn't prove its case, but you have professed your innocence numerous times, Cooper said, according to a transcript. The next article is titled, Drivers Obsess Over Retro Plates by Seth Klayman. Joe Duran first saw the strange new license plate on his Arvada neighbor's car and thought it was fake. Though Colorado has a sizable collection of specialty license plates as alternatives to its standard green sky, white mountains design, Duran had never seen this one before. Black plate, white letters. His first sighting was in early 2023, shortly after a series of previously retired plates were released to the public as retro options. Now, a year after their triumphant return, the blackout plates are seemingly everywhere, catching on at a pace that surprised state officials and left records in their dust, while the extra $25 annual fee charged for them has raised millions of dollars to help Coloradans with disabilities. Just shy of 170,000 vehicle owners have snapped up the black plates, according to state figures. That has far outpaced the two new designs for Colorado's 150th anniversary plates, which went on sale in August and had been snapped up by nearly 16,000 owners as of last month. One of those, dubbed Pikes Peak or Bust, briefly sold at a record pace, but it's been no match for the black plate. Why are drivers abandoning Colorado's roadway mainstay, the classic green and white plates that for decades have reliably set our bumpers apart from the comparatively lame plates of our neighbors? Probably because it's cool, Duran said. I can't tell you the number of cars in my neighborhood. It seems like a lot of people, he said. He's now among them. After some internet sleuthing confirmed that his neighbor's plates was real, Duran decided to pick up a pair for his white Tesla. They looked sleek and were different from plates everybody else had, at least then. Now they're so ubiquitous that his 5-year-old daughter calls out fellow black-plated travelers from the back seat. Scores of drivers, more than 200, gushed about the plates to the Denver Post after it asked about the appeal last month. They used words including simple, phenomenal, and sleek. My inner goth teenage self needed them, one reader wrote. Classy and stylish, especially on all-black cars, another said. One reader included the excited eyeballs emoji in an email to the Post. Another said the plates looked like something a 1950s detective would have, which is just about on the money, since Colorado first released the original blackout plate in 1945. A year in, the black license plate has been the fastest and most popular plate ever, Lieutenant Governor Diane Primavera said. Danielle Carr, a spokesman for the State Department of Revenue, said uptake of the plates demolished state officials' estimates that 6,000 to 7,000 of the plates would be sold in 2023. The coolness was the point for state officials, who, with their legislature's help, re-released retired black, red, and blue plates in January 2023. Drivers can also get a fourth plate called the Greenie, which is a reverse of the current standard green and white plate, with green mountains, and was the state's standard from 1962 to 1999. The other three have solid backgrounds with white letters and numbers. The blue and red plates date to 1914 and 1915, respectively. Apart from the runaway success of the black plate, the historic options each have sold 6,000 to 7,000 sets, about in line with what the state had expected. The $25 annual fee charged for the plates, on top of the usual upfront license plate costs, goes to support the Colorado Disability Funding Committee. The more popular the plates, the more money that fund raises. The next article is titled, Hezbollah, Israel, Trade Heavy Cross-Border Fire, by Bassem Moreau, Sami Magdi, and Najim Jobain. Israel and Lebanon-based Hezbollah traded fire Saturday in one of the heaviest days of cross-border fighting in recent weeks, a day after the militia's leader urged retaliation for the targeted killing, presumably by Israel, of a top Hamas leader in Lebanon's capital. Hezbollah's leader, Sayed Hassan Nasrallah, said that if his group didn't strike back for the killing Tuesday of Saleh Arori, Hamas deputy political leader, all of Lebanon would be vulnerable to Israeli attacks. With the risk of regional escalation, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken kicked off an urgent Middle East diplomatic tour, his fourth since the Israel-Hamas war erupted 3 months ago. It is absolutely necessary to avoid Lebanon being dragged into a regional conflict, the European Union's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said in Beirut during his own Middle East tour. Hezbollah said it launched 62 rockets toward an Israeli air surveillance base on Mount Meron and scored direct hits in its initial response to Arori's killing. It said rockets also struck 2 army posts near the border. The Israeli military said about 40 rockets were fired toward Meron and that a base was targeted, but it made no mention of the base being hit. It said it struck the Hezbollah cell that fired the rockets. Israeli airstrikes on the southern Lebanon hit the outskirts of Kutharia al-Siyad, a village about 25 miles from the border, Lebanon's state-run national news agency said, adding that there were casualties. such strikes deeper inside Lebanon have been rare since the border fighting started nearly 3 months ago. NNA also said Israeli forces shelled border areas, including the town of Qaim. Israel's army had no immediate comment. Separately, the armed wing of the Islamic group in Lebanon, the country's branch of the Muslim Brotherhood and a close ally of Hamas, said it fired 2 volleys of rockets toward the Israeli city of Kiryat Shmona on Friday night. 2 of the group's members were killed in the strike that killed Arouri. The war in Gaza was triggered by a deadly Hamas attack on southern Israel, in which terrorists killed about 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and took roughly 250 hostages. Hamas has been designated as a terrorist organization by the United States, Canada, and the European Union. In recent weeks, Israel has been scaling back its military assault in northern Gaza and pressing its offensive in the territory's south, where most of Gaza's 2.3 million Palestinians are being squeezed into smaller areas in a humanitarian disaster while being pounded by Israeli airstrikes. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in a video statement, reiterated that the war must not be stopped until the objectives of eliminating Hamas, getting Israel's hostages returned, and ensuring that Gaza won't be a threat to Israel are met. On Saturday, the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza said 122 Palestinians had been killed over the past 24 hours, bringing the total since the start of the war to 22,722. The count does not differentiate between combatants and civilians. The ministry has said 2/3 of those killed have been women or children. The overall wounded rose to 58,166, the ministry said. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in the central city of Deir al-Balah received at least 46 bodies overnight, according to hospital records seen by the Associated Press. Many were men who apparently had been shot. The dead also included 5 members of a family who were killed in an airstrike. The latest Israeli dropped leaflets urged Palestinians in some areas near the hospital to evacuate, citing dangerous fighting. In the southern Gazan city of Khan Yunis, the focus of Israel's ground offensive, the European hospital received the bodies of 18 people killed in an overnight airstrike on a house, said Salah al-Hams, head of the hospital's nursing department. Citing witnesses, he said more than 36 people had been sheltering in the house, including some who had been displaced. Israel has held Hamas responsible for civilian casualties, saying the group embeds itself within Gaza's civilian infrastructure. Still, international criticism of Israel's conduct has grown because of the rising civilian death toll. The United States has urged Israel to do more to prevent harm to civilians, even as it sends weapons and munitions while shielding its close ally against international censure. Blinken began his latest Mideast trip in Turkey, which the Biden administration believes can exert influence, particularly on Iran and its proxies, to tamp down fears of a regional conflagration. The next article is titled, "Woman in Her 90s Rescued 5 Days After Earthquake" by Hiro Kome, Ayaka McGill, and Yuri Kageyama. A woman in her 90s was pulled alive from a collapsed house in western Japan late Saturday, 124 hours after a major quake slammed the region, killing at least 126 people, toppling buildings, and setting off landslides. The woman in Suzu City, Ishikawa Prefecture, had survived for more than 5 days after the 7.6 magnitude quake that hit the area Monday. Nationally broadcast news footage showed helmeted rescue workers covering the view of the area with blue plastic, and the woman was not visible. Chances for survival diminish after the first 72 hours. Several other dramatic rescues have been reported over the past few days as soldiers, firefighters, and others joined a widespread effort. Among the 126 dead was a 5-year-old boy who had been recovering from injuries he suffered when boiling water spilled on him during the Monday's 7.6 magnitude earthquake. His condition suddenly worsened, and he died Friday, according to Ishikawa Prefecture, the hardest-hit region. Aftershocks threatened to bury more homes and roadblocks crucial for relief shipments. Officials warned that roads already cracked could collapse completely. That risk was growing with rain and snow expected overnight and Sunday. Wajima City has recorded the highest number of deaths with 69, followed by Suzu with 38. More than 500 people were injured, at least 27 of them seriously. The tremblers left roofs sitting haplessly on roads and everything beneath them crushed flat. Roads were warped like rubber. A fire turned a neighborhood in Wajima to ashes. More than 200 people were still unaccounted for, although the number has fluctuated. 11 people were reported trapped under 2 homes that collapsed in Anamizu. For Shiro Kokuda, 76, the house in Wajima where he grew up was spared, but nearby temple went up in flames, and he was still looking for his friends at evacuation centers. "It's been really tough," he said. Japan is one of the fastest aging societies in the world. The population in Ishikawa and nearby areas has dwindled over the years. A fragile economy centered on crafts and tourism is now more imperiled than ever. In an unusual gesture from nearby North Korea, leader Kim Jong-un sent a message of condolence to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, the official Korean Central News Agency reported Saturday. Japan earlier received messages expressing sympathy and promises of aid from U.S. President Joe Biden and other allies. Japanese government spokesman Yoshimasa Hayashi told reporters that Japan was grateful for all of the messages, including the one from North Korea. Hayashi said the last time Japan received a condolence message from North Korea for a disaster was in 1995. Along Japan's coastline, power was gradually being restored, but water supplies were still short. Emergency water systems were also damaged. Thousands of troops were flying and trucking in water, food, and medicine to the more than 30,000 people who had evacuated to auditoriums, schools, and other facilities. The nationally circulated Yomiuri newspaper reported that its aerial study had located more than 100 landslides in the area, and some were blocking lifeline roads. Some communities remained isolated, and others were still waiting for aid. "I hope the city recovers, and I hope people won't leave, and they stay here to work hard toward recovery," said Seizo Shinbo, a seafood trader who was stocking up on noodles, canned goods, and rice balls at a supermarket. "There is no food, there is no water, and the worst is gas. People are still in kilometer-long lines." The next article is titled, "Colorado Alcohol Deaths Surged 60% in 4 years, but No Public Outcry," by Meg Wingerter. Fatal drug overdoses have been slowly rising for a decade, but when the number of Coloradans killed by fentanyl soared during the first 2 years of the pandemic, state leaders, law enforcement officials, public health managers, even ordinary people called for drastic action. Hoping to stem the loss of life, lawmakers took the controversial step in 2022 of making it a felony to possess even a small amount of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid responsible for most of the state's fatal overdoses. Schools and colleges began stockpiling the overdose reversal medication naloxone. Families and friends of people killed by fentanyl rallied for more treatment resources. Nonprofits conducted educational campaigns about the dangers of counterfeit medications, advising one pill can kill. Yet, at the same time, another drug quietly fueled its own surge in fatalities in Colorado. Deaths from alcohol in Colorado shot up more than 60% between 2018 and 2022, falling slightly in 2022, as did fatal overdoses, but alcohol fatalities are still 50% above pre-COVID levels, and experts fear Coloradans' heavier drinking since 2020 will continue to exact a deadly cost in the years to come. Alcohol killed 1,547 people statewide in 2022, fewer than the 1,799 who died of overdoses, but that narrowly defined figure only includes certain types of organ damage and complications of withdrawal. Factor in deaths from long-term complications of drinking, and estimates put alcohol's annual toll in this state at roughly twice that number. Coloradans die from the effects of alcohol at one of the highest rates in the country, but in comparison to fentanyl, the state's reaction has been a shrug. Legislators haven't seriously considered measures to discourage drinking, and voters expanded access to alcohol in grocery stores. Governor Jared Polis said he considers drinking a matter of personal responsibility. The Denver Post is publishing a 4-part series this week examining why Colorado consistently ranks among the worst for alcohol-related deaths. The state hasn't raised alcohol taxes or done anything to restrict access, steps that can reduce deaths. And while treatment is available in Colorado, information about how to access it hasn't always reached families searching for help. Representative Mark Snyder, a Colorado Springs Democrat and chair of the House committee that oversees the state's alcohol regulation, said he found it pretty shocking to learn alcohol-related deaths are comparable to drug overdoses in Colorado. "We kind of forget about alcohol," he said. Of course, alcohol and harder drugs like fentanyl also have important differences. The fact that more people die from alcohol overall reflects that far more people use it. A single more potent than expected dose of fentanyl can kill a user, while heavy drinking can take decades to claim a life. And the two drugs' secondary effects are difficult to compare. Illicit fentanyl brings violent crime from drug trafficking, while alcohol can increase the odds that personal disputes end in assault or murder. Representatives for the alcohol industry said government intervention via increased taxation isn't the answer to the growing problem of excessive drinking in Colorado. The state would do better to focus on screening and referring people who need help to treatment as needed, said Amanda Berger, Vice President of Science and Health at the Distilled Spirits Council. Raising taxes will just push drinkers to use cheaper products, she said. Tax hikes will unfairly raise the cost on responsible consumers and harm hospitality businesses still trying to rebound from the pandemic, amid a host of new challenges, including inflation and staff shortages, Berger said in a statement. Only about half of Americans drink on a regular basis, but surveys have shown that those who do are more educated and affluent. The kind of people who make the laws, said David Jernigan, a Boston University professor of health law, policy, and management, who has studied alcohol marketing. They're less willing to regulate a socially acceptable drug that's popular in their circles than they are to take a stand against tobacco or opioids, he said. Lawmakers in charge of regulating alcohol said they were surprised to hear that the number of people dying from drinking wasn't even comparable to deaths from other drugs. They and the governor's office pointed to Colorado's efforts to stop underage people from drinking and to reduce impaired driving. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention attributed only about 8% of Colorado's alcohol deaths to car crashes. However, fewer than liver disease, cardiovascular problems, or suicide. Reducing underage drinking could help stem the tide of deaths, but any effects would be decades in the future, while people who start drinking as teens are at a higher risk for alcohol-related problems. Most die in their 50s or later. For a long time, moderate drinking was considered healthy, or at least not something to worry about. That's contributed to confusion because, unlike smokers, regular drinkers don't know what they're consuming could hurt them, said Bill Berman, former director of the Public Health Institute at Denver Health. Someone who drinks a 6-pack of beer on a Saturday night doesn't necessarily see that as unsafe, even though studies show it increases their risk of premature death, he said. I think almost everyone recognizes that severe alcoholism is a problem, that person who's falling down on the street. But most people who drink aren't aware they could be at risk, he said. The alcohol industry has been quite successful in keeping the focus on the most extreme drinkers, Jernigan said. When someone picks up a pack of cigarettes, they see a warning label that clearly outlines specific diseases they're risking. But the alcohol label only states that drinking may cause birth defects or interfere with driving, and may cause health problems. That doesn't tell you anything, he said. You don't think of alcohol as a factor in heart attacks, as a factor in cognitive decline. Thank you for joining us for the Boulder Daily Camera and Longmont Times Call. My name is Malachi King.